The untold truth of Marie Antoinette. Misunderstood or monster? Was Marie Antoinette truly the monster history painted her to be, or just a misunderstood young girl trapped inside a golden cage? At 14, they ripped her from everything she knew, dressed her in gold, and shipped her to France to marry a stranger. The people called her the Austrian. They blamed her for their starvation. 15 years later, Marie Antoinette would lose her crown, her children, her husband, and finally her head to the guillotine's blade. History painted her as the villain who destroyed France. But what if everything you know about her is a lie? From Vienna to Versailles, the unprepared bride. Born Maria Antonia in Vienna, she was the 15th child of Empress Maria Theresa of Austria, one of Europe's most powerful rulers. Her childhood was not one of rigorous academic, while her elder siblings were groomed for power. Young Maria Antonia was indulged. This lack of focus meant that, even as her political marriage was being arranged, she still couldn't speak French properly and knew almost nothing of France's history, culture, or complex political factions, the country she was destined to rule as queen. She was just a child, but the world needed her to be a diplomat. Her mother, Empress Maria Theresa, was a master strategist. She had arranged this marriage to seal a political alliance known as the Diplomatic Revolution, uniting the two powerful Habsburg and Bourbon empires that had been enemies for centuries. This peace treaty, intended to hold Europe together, would be cemented through this teenage girl's wedding ring. No pressure, right? But the pressure was unimaginable. The journey to France in April 1770 took weeks. Marie Antoinette was forced to stop and literally change everything about herself. French officials made her remove every piece of Austrian clothing, every jewel, and even dismiss all of her Austrian attendants. It was a complete, literal stripping away of her identity. She walked into the pavilion as an Austrian princess and emerged dressed entirely as a French dauphine, having been erased and reborn in the eyes of the French court before she even set foot in her new home. But the symbolic erasure of her identity was nothing compared to the complete social and romantic disaster that awaited her future husband. When she finally met the Dauphin Louis Auguste, the future Louis XVI, the awkwardness was immediate. He was a year older, shy, overweight, and physically ill-suited for the demanding social life of Versailles. He was famously more interested in locksmithing, hunting, and obscure technical studies than in courtship or courtly etiquette. She was bubbly, social, beautiful, and completely out of her element. Their wedding on May 16, 1770 was a spectacular public event at Versailles' Royal Chapel, but privately the 7-year-long failure to consummate the marriage was a disaster waiting to happen, a well-known scandal that only intensified the court's gossip. But how did a teen queen, trapped in a cold marriage in a suffocating palace, begin to desperately seek an escape that would ultimately be her doom? Was this the beginning of her downfall, or was she just a lonely teenager trying to survive? Her golden prison. Life at Versailles. To escape a non-existent marriage and the suffocating pressure of court, Marie Antoinette threw herself into the most outrageously complex performative social ritual the world has ever known. Welcome to her golden prison. Marie Antoinette lived surrounded by unimaginable luxury. Over 2,000 rooms, 1,200 fireplaces, and the Hall of Mirrors, which contained 357 mirrors, each a potent symbol of unimaginable wealth, in an age when most French people couldn't afford glass windows. Yet outside the palace gates, ordinary families were facing economic ruin, selling their children's clothes just to buy a piece of bread. But here's where the story gets complicated. Marie Antoinette didn't create this system of excessive spending or archaic etiquette. She inherited it. French queens had always been expected to dress magnificently, host elaborate parties, and display royal power. The difference was that previous queens had done so during times of relative prosperity. Marie Antoinette became queen during France's worst financial crisis in centuries, a crisis driven by the country's massive debt from wars, including the costly support of the American Revolution. She was playing by the old rules, but the world had already changed. Her attempts to escape the etiquette only made things worse. She built the Petit Trianon, a mock village, or Hameau de la Reine, where she could pretend to live simply, dressing as a shepherdess and overseeing her own small farm. To her, this was a vital personal escape from suffocating public life. To her critics, however, it was proof that she was living in a fantasy world, playing poor while real French peasants starved. She simply couldn't win the court of public opinion. The poor girl just wanted to live simply, but the world demanded that she played the queen. But it wasn't the petty court gossip or the expense of her dresses that finally destroyed her. It was one devastating, massive scandal, a bizarre criminal plot that made the French people finally turn on their queen for good. The turning point. The diamond necklace and the lie. The vicious rumors and hatred reached a boiling point with a scandal in 1785 known as the Affair of the Diamond Necklace. A sophisticated confidence trickster, Jean de la Motte, convinced Cardinal Louis de Rohan that Marie Antoinette secretly wanted an impossibly expensive diamond necklace, a piece originally commissioned for Louis XV's mistress. De la Motte forged letters from the Queen, arranged secret nocturnal meetings with an impersonator, and duped the Cardinal into using his credit to purchase the necklace for the Queen, supposedly in secret. The necklace was then promptly broken up and sold for profit in London. When the jewelers demanded payment from the Queen directly, the entire plot collapsed. Louis XVI had the Cardinal arrested in the Hall of Mirrors. Though the ensuing trial eventually proved Marie Antoinette was completely innocent, the damage was irreversible. The public, already primed to believe the Queen was decadent and manipulative, saw the royal family's immediate resort to public arrest as a way of silencing the truth. The court's attempted justice backfired spectacularly, confirming the public's worst suspicions and forever linking the Queen's name with unimaginable, frivolous theft and excess. She was innocent, but no one believed her. Was that her fault or theirs? And then came the four words, the dangerous myth that would turn her into history's most hated woman. The phrase that would define Marie Antoinette's legacy forever wasn't even something she said. Qu'il mange de la brioche. Let them eat cake. This is the perfect image. A pampered queen so disconnected from reality that when told that the French people had no bread, she casually suggests they simply eat expensive pastries instead. It confirmed everything the revolutionary propaganda machine needed to be true. To some, she was a heartless aristocrat. To others, a victim of history's cruelest rumor. But historians have found something remarkable. This story was already circulating in France decades before Marie Antoinette even arrived. The philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote about a great princess who made this exact comment in his work Confessions. Published in 1767, Marie Antoinette arrived in France in 1770, and she was only 9 years old in 1760. The quote was an old, recycled insult, an anti-monarchical trope that got stuck to whatever queen the people happened to hate at the moment. Marie Antoinette just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time when this particular piece of gossip found its perfect foreign target. This is the most chilling part of her story. Marie Antoinette was condemned to death partly because of words she never spoke. Her reputation was built on a lie that became so famous it's still repeated in history books today. But does a lie told often enough become the truth? And if it does, was she the villain or the victim? By the time revolution swept through France, Marie Antoinette had become a symbol of everything wrong with the monarchy. She was no longer just a queen. She was the Austrian bitch, the foreign woman who had corrupted their king and stolen their treasury. The propaganda was so effective, so venomous, that soon the revolution demanded the one thing she feared most, not just her crown, but her blood. What final desperate act would seal her family's terrible fate? The final collapse and legacy. The French Revolution began in 1789, fueled by years of economic disaster, failed harvests, and justifiable anger toward a system where nobles paid virtually no taxes while commoners carried the entire financial burden. Marie Antoinette watched her world collapse in slow motion. First came the angry pamphlets. Then, in October 1789, came the Women's March on Versailles, a mob that forced its way into the palace, demanding that the royal family move to Paris, where they could be watched more closely. The queen, who had once commanded armies of servants, now found herself a prisoner in her own capital. From golden palace to prison cell, how does a queen become a captive in her own kingdom? The royal family's desperate attempt to escape France in June 1791, known as the Flight to Varennes, sealed their fate. They disguised themselves as common travelers and tried to flee to the eastern frontier, but their large, distinctive carriage was recognized. They were dragged back to Paris in shame, and the attempt proved to revolutionaries that the royals could never be trusted to accept the new order. The revolution had moved beyond reform. It demanded blood. King Louis XVI was executed in January 1793. Marie Antoinette spent her final months in a tiny, damp prison cell in the Conciergerie. She was tried for treason, accused of sending military secrets to Austria, and even charges of incest, which were baseless. Most of the political charges were impossible to prove, but in revolutionary France, proof mattered less than punishment. She had become the scapegoat for a nation's rage, convenient, foreign, and already hated. On October 16, 1793, Marie Antoinette rode through the streets of Paris in an open wooden cart, her hands tied behind her back. The woman who had once traveled in golden carriages now faced jeering crowds as she made her way to the guillotine. She was 37 years old. Her hair, witnesses noted, had turned completely white during her imprisonment. She maintained her dignity even in those final moments, famously apologizing when she accidentally stepped on her executioner's foot. The crowd cheered when her head fell. The Austrian princess, who had arrived in France as a symbol of hope, had become a symbol of everything the revolution sought to destroy. But in that final moment, was she truly guilty? Or just a woman who never stood a chance? Marie Antoinette died for a lie, the famous four-word phrase she never spoke. Her tragic end is a warning that in any era, from Versailles to social media, unverified rumor can be far more powerful and destructive than the truth. So was she evil or misunderstood? Maybe the truth, like her legend, lies somewhere in between.